Hello, everyone. I'd like to welcome everyone to the Convergence Data Classification Community Group. And the topic for today is going to be analytics that produced real cost savings. The presenter will be Richard Turner. And the setup of this presentation is going to be a 15-minute presentation followed by a 15-minute Q&A. And at this time, I'd like to turn it over to Richard Turner.
Hey, Eric, thank you for the introduction. And thanks for everybody for joining the classification community group. So today's presentation, some of the learning points before we get started. We're going to talk about some of the business problems poor data can create for your business. We're going to talk about how you can enhance your part data with classification methods. And then we're going to introduce our DBA, what we call a data value analysis. And we're going to talk about clustering, and we're going to talk about specific case examples. And then lastly, we'll talk about the benefits a DBA can provide to your company, which means the cost savings. Just a quick background on Convergence Data. We've been in business for 18 years, working across a variety of industries. We are focused very much on part data and part classification. One of the things we offer as a service is we'll enrich part data. And what we mean by part data, it could be purchase parts, design parts, MRO, service parts, parts that you want to sell online. Many times the projects we do are in conjunction with migrations for ERP and PLM, which is a good time to enhance your data prior to putting into a new system. And with this enhanced data, it typically supports parts reuse initiatives and helps companies mitigate parts proliferation. Then lastly, we'll get into some of the interesting analytics, which we'll talk about in today's presentation that high quality data can provide you. So let's start with the kind of the bad news. If you're a company today that has bad data, how does that impact your business? Well, a lot of times those companies will have part duplication issue. If you have bad data today, most likely you have duplicates. Or you have parts that are very similar, or raw materials that are very similar. And if your data is bad, it's really hard for engineers to reuse parts. So that leads to a part proliferation issue. It's very hard for engineers to find parts or to find preferred parts if your data quality is poor. And then another organization that will suffer from parts data, bad data, is your supply chain, which will increase direct material costs with bad data. Because if you have a proliferation of duplicate parts and near duplicate parts, you're going to have a lot of issues with high direct material spend, typically contributed by having too many suppliers providing you basically the same types of parts at different pricing and at different inventory levels, which is a huge cost to any organization. And then lastly, if your data is poor and you have electronic components, you may be in risk and have compliance and lifecycle issues that you don't even realize. You may be putting obsolete components into your bills of material. So what do we mean by data? I think we just want to start by setting the table by what good data looks like. When we first meet companies and talk to them and look at their data, typically, primarily what they have for data is in this dark blue on the very top, which is they'll have a part number. They'll have a description that may be ambiguous. And if it's a purchase part, they'll have a manufacturer name and a manufacturer part number. And that may be all they have for their parts. And what we will do is we will come in and help them provide more information on this particular part. We'll provide the information in the lighter blue, which we call the technical data. This is all the information that engineering will need to make it easy for them to find a part or compare similar parts to make the right decision of the part they want to say put into a new bill of material. And then in the green, we'll provide this commercial data that will help the sourcing and supply chain organization, which will include new descriptions for their ERP system or their PLM system. We'll normalize their manufacturer part names if there's different names for the same manufacturer. We'll also provide a noun and modifier to help with the classification. And if there's a specific commodity code or if they have multiple commodity codes, we'll help normalize their commodity codes to a single code so that they can do the roll-up reports that they like to be able to do. This is what we mean by good data. This is an example of a circuit breaker. So let's talk about the title of today's presentation, a DBA. We find that many companies are buying similar parts from different suppliers, and the DBA is what's going to help them. That's what we call a data value analysis. We'll start by talking about how we prioritize categories. We can do that by different criteria. And then the foundation of making a DBA work starts with parts classification, which we'll talk about. Then once you've classified and enhanced all your parts, we'll get into the fun part, which is the analytics and the clusters that will allow you to group similar parts. And then lastly, once you've done your analytics, you can start to look at and identify the cost savings. And some of those cost savings may be due to price alignment or supplier and parts rationalization. So one of the most important things to do when you first start is to prioritize your categories for your DBA. And what do we mean by prioritize? You want to come up with some criteria. Typically, purchase parts are good candidates for a DBA, so that's something you might want to look at. You might want to look at what you're buying the most from a spend perspective. So you're going to need help from your procurement organization to get the commercial data. You probably want to know, where do you have most of your part numbers? Which commodity groups do you have the biggest parts proliferation issue? Where do you have most of your part numbers? And it's also good to know, are these parts that you're looking at cut across a lot of different programs and platforms and different divisions? That's also usually a good candidate for a DBA. And if there is more than one place to create a part, then you know you're probably have a good opportunity to see results from a DBA, because it's probably duplicates. And as we talked about earlier, if you have poor data quality for a particular commodity group, that's another criteria to consider. And then lastly, if you're about to implement a new system like an ERP system, which can cost companies millions of dollars, you'd be crazy not to enhance the data you're about to put in that ERP system so that you can truly get the value. Otherwise, you're going to be introducing duplicate inventory and poor quality data into a multi-million-dollar system. So that's something you might want to consider as well. So here's one of the first steps is, once you've identified the commodity groups that you want to work on, you want to build a classification structure. And we just showed a sample of a classification structure for all the different parts you're working on. And these are just basic mechanical parts. Here's a classification structure that we've derived for a particular, say, company, and you can see the categories and subcategories and lower leaf classes. And then to the right is an example of a single part. And I believe this is a blind rivet. And you can see here that we've enhanced this blind rivet with a variety of information. On the right, you can see all the technical attribute data, the type, the weight, the diameters, the different types of diameters. You can see the enhanced descriptions that we provide, both short and long descriptions on the bottom right. And then on the left, what we talked about earlier, is all the commercial data you want to get on this rivet, which includes the usage, the unit price, maybe the average unit price for the last year, and any other spend-related information that the procurement group can provide you. So before you start, we recommend you do what we call a scorecard, which is you want to profile the commodity group before you start doing your DBA analysis. And that starts by identifying what are the key attributes for this particular commodity group. And once you've identified and all agree on what are the key attributes, you want to check the fill rates for the information that you've collected. And if they're not, over 80%, you want to make sure that you've got good fill rates before you do your DBA analysis, so you can get accurate results. And then once that data has been harvested, you want to normalize it. You can't have multiple values, all different values meaning the same thing. So you want to make sure you normalize both your string data and your numeric data to the appropriate units of measure. And then lastly, you want to gather your commercial data. So you want to make a check to make sure you've got the pricing and supplier information you need to do your DBA. So here's a graphical representation of what a scorecard could look like. So on the top left, this is just the checklist of all the things I was just talking about. Do you pass in each one of these areas? And then, some of the other things you might want to include in your scorecard. You might want to look at a profile of these parts by different divisions. Which divisions have the most of these parts. That's probably a good thing to know. And then in the bottom left is a graphical example of a population report. You can see those are all the key attributes and what percent population they have. And you can see the population percentages are quite high in blue, and that means you're in good shape there. And then lastly, you might want to just do a quick analysis on one particular variable. And in this case, we're looking at metal coil, and you can look at thickness, and you can see that, wow, we've got a good distribution here for the thickness of metal coil. So that's a good check to run as well. So the case example we want to talk to you guys about today for this DBA is a real simple item, which is a rivet. So in this case example, we are looking at just 200. Typically, if you're doing a DBA analysis, it's good to probably have, at least 150 to 200 of the items to get good results. It's obviously very hard to do a DBA on a commodity that may have, say, less than 50. It's going to probably be, you're not going to find as much opportunity. So in this example, for the 200 or so rivets, we generated 5,000 attribute values. And we also came up with a quick estimate of the duplicates and near duplicates. So one of the things I recommend in your DBA analysis is to all our customers is have a executive summary up front. And this is really an example of an executive summary that kind of highlights the opportunity and the savings opportunity that the executives will see right up front before they read your DBA. Show them what the opportunity is in the first couple of slides. So from here, it looks like there's a potential of 40% duplicates and 90% near duplicates for these rivets, which is quite high. And this is and the spend for these rivets is over $500,000. So there's significant opportunities here for rationalization. And try to estimate what you think those savings are. In this example, we think we can save close to $60,000 on these rivets with a DBA analysis. So this is a sample of a case of an executive summary. Now here are some of the analytical reports that you might want to include in your DBA. This first one here shows you, as we talked about earlier, here are all the attributes for rivets. And on the left are the most common ones, which we've identified as the key attributes. You can see them from left to right. And then on the right side are some of the least common attributes. And the important thing to note is the population rates on these key attributes are very high, close to 100%, which is good. And then the least common ones have just over 60%. So you need to be careful how you use those in the DBA analysis because they're not 100% populated. Now that you've got good population rates on your key attributes, let's look at analyzing a few of them. And one of those key attributes was shear strength. So for the rivets, here is all of the different shear strengths and the most common shear strengths for the rivet. So this is something that your company probably has no idea when they're buying rivets, what are the most common and least common rivets by shear strength. So your DBA analysis will expose some real interesting analytics that they may have never seen before or ever really knew because they didn't have good data. And you can see the most popular ones are in the green and blue colors, and the least common ones are the smaller slivers of the pie chart for as far as the shear strength goes. And also you can see what the most popular diameters are for the rivets in the graph to the right. So all we're doing is looking at a single parameter or key attribute, and we're running analytics, and we're putting these reports into these graphs into our DBA report. So here is just a quick comparison. It's kind of what we started with. We started with, as I mentioned earlier, the manufacturer part numbers. And then on the right, we produced all this good information as part of our classification effort. We cleansed the supplier names. We produced new descriptions. We provided some technical attribute data. So this is something good to show management how much you enhance the data, because a business can obviously benefit on this enhanced data alone. And now we get into kind of the meat of the DBA, which are what are the percent duplicates and near duplicates. And for these rivets, as we mentioned earlier in the executive summary, here's a graph showing 40% duplicates for the rivets. And you can see these duplicates are based on the diameter, fastener, material, shear strength, and tensile strength. Those are the 4 or 5 key attributes for rivets, and that's a pretty high percentage. So this is an excellent candidate for rationalization for your company. And then another thing to do is to do what we call a cluster analysis. We have a clustering tool that we use to do this, and what we do to do a cluster analysis is we weight the attributes for the rivets. You can see at the very top, you see fastener length, diameter, material, shear strength. They all have weight factors. We put in weight factors, and then we run a cluster analysis. And what it does is in the lower chart, it identifies groups of similar rivets that are not exact, but they're very similar based on the weight factors. And that might give you some really good analytics in terms of looking for opportunities for rationalizing spend. So you can see a lot of these rivets have very similar diameter, fastener length, material, shear strength, and tensile strength in the bottom of the chart. And then to the right, you can see who you're buying them from, you know, and what price you're buying them from. And you can see the prices are very different. You can buy them in different volumes. And this is just an excellent opportunity for your supply chain to look at this and start to rationalize how many suppliers they're buying these from and start to normalize some of this pricing so that you don't have such a wide range of pricing. Looks like for these rivets, it goes from 22 cents to as high as $10 for, say, some spot buys that you've done. So you probably could have mitigated that spot buy, which I assume that is when you only get a usage of 75, if they were able to realize that there were already rivets that were in inventory that were very similar to what they needed. But because they didn't have that data, they went and purchased all those rivets and spent extra money they didn't need to spend. So there's a lot of different things you can do with a cluster analysis. And there's no real science to the weight factors. You can put whatever you want in here. It's usually an iterative process to get the results that you want to achieve. And then lastly, we do a benefit analysis. We look at, and this is one way of doing it. There's a lot of different ways of doing it. We look at all of our clusters. We did about 13 clusters on these rivets. We looked at the spend. You know, some of these, you know, like the first cluster might have had 100 rivets. The second one might have had 50. So that's why the spend kind of varies so much. And then that's the current spend. And then we look at potential annual spend based on the lowest cost item in the cluster. And then from there, we're able to derive potential savings. And you can see that's how we came up with our $58,000 in savings. It's based on if they were able to normalize the pricing on these rivets to the lowest priced item in the cluster, they can achieve close to $58,000. And you don't even need to update a part in a bill of material. This is just the work that the supply chain can do to achieve these savings without basically taxing engineering to do anything. So to summarize, there's a lot of different ways and different benefits that you can get from a DBA. You can expose price alignment opportunities, which I was just talking about, supplier consolidation. You can help with preferred part identification. What are the parts that you want to make preferred, which have the most common configurations, and which ones should not be preferred that have maybe least common configurations that you want to phase out? Those are the ones that may be driving the proliferation. And with this information, you can truly implement parts governance. So when someone goes to propose, say, a new rivet, you can help them find an existing one that closely matches what they look for, that they're looking for, and eliminate the need of raising a new part number. So that's a good example of how you can promote parts governance with this good data. And you can start to standardize on features and try to limit some of the characteristics of, say, a commodity that's driving all the different parts. You might want to look at, say, the finish or thickness. Can we standardize on some of these, and we would have a lot less of these for a particular commodity. And with this good data, engineers can reuse parts and stop creating unnecessary parts. And they can also spend a lot less time looking for parts or spend time creating parts because it's with this data they can easily find them. And then the downstream benefits are obviously inventory reduction, and we can minimize things like spot buys. So that's the end of my presentation. Eric, I'll pass it over to you.
Okay, and this is the Q&A part of the presentation here. So this is an opportunity to ask some questions.
They can just, can they type it?
I believe you have the option to type a question in or raise your hand to ask a question. I have a question from Tim. How do you determine cluster weight factors?
Let me go back. That's a good question. So here's our cluster analysis right here, and what Tim is referring to are these weight factors in the very top of the, you can see right here, the weight factor of 5 for fastener length and diameter. So some of the things that I recommend, you know, for the numeric attributes, I recommend higher weight factors. The way our cluster analysis works is that if you don't have high weight factors, it may bring in too broad of a mix, say, of diameters. So if you can see the diameters here, like 1/8 of an inch, if you had a small weight factor, you might see 1/4 of an inch or 1/2 an inch in there in the mix. So you might want to increase that weight factor so you can get a tighter tolerance on the numeric data. So for the numeric data, I recommend high weight factors. For the string data, which is really yes or no, I recommend a weight factor of just around 1, because that's a big, that in itself would be a big enough penalty. That's a good question. It's like I said, it's an iterative process. I recommend you play around with your weight factors, and then you'll figure out the right balance for each commodity group. Is there any other questions?
Okay, I have a question from Nick. Does Convergence do the DBA or can its customers?
So we do the DBAs, and we can also train our customers to do DBAs. At the end of the day, we want to train our customers to do the DBAs. As I mentioned, it's not a one and done thing. Sometimes we will do a DBA after we finish harvesting data for a commodity and just kind of give them some direction, with our DBA, but it's really up to our customers to take it over and iterate the DBAs and align the DBAs to the opportunities that they want to be able to achieve, which we really don't know what they're trying to do internally, but we can do it as a service. Usually that just it highlights the opportunity, and really the DBAs, when we do parts classification, if you just do this, management really has no appreciation. If you put together a DBA report and you have a nice executive summary and you distribute it to management, then they have a lot more respect for what you're doing around improving and enhancing data with parts classification. So I highly recommend, if you're doing it on your own, that you do one. Any other questions?
I do have a question from Megan. How long does it take to do a DBA?
Oh, that's just not a single answer. I mean, it depends on a number of factors, but I think the biggest factor is the number of parts that you're looking at in your DBA. If you have a category of 10,000 items, obviously you need to harvest the data and classify the data for those 10,000 items. And that would take us about a month to do as kind of the foundation of getting ready for the DBA. But once you have that as an input, doing the DBA itself really does not take that long to do. And we have analytical tools that we've been showing you screenshots of it's very easy for us to go in, do a population report. Once the key attributes are known, we can run the population report. And then once we see that we've got good population rates, we can start doing all those analytics we show you. Those are all just reports that you can create in a day. I think really the bulk of the work is, the observations that you want to share and the report that you create and what you want to tell management based on what you're seeing in these graphs. That might take you a couple of days to do, to get it just right. And you might want to do it with your internal team first before you present it to management to get everybody on board with what the results that you produce in your DBA. But it's a good question, but the thing is, it's well worth the investment. I recommend. I think it'd be a shame if you didn't do one. Any other questions? We got time for one more.
I am showing one more question here from John. What is the purpose of a DBA?
So the purpose of the DBA, it's at the end of the day, you spend a lot of time doing all this work on your parts classification work. It's just a nice takeaway. Here's what we learned. This is what we found. It summarizes everything you found, whether it's the opportunities for duplicates and near duplicates. That's an obvious one, but maybe less obvious. What's driving differentiation? Why do we have so many of these items? And what are the characteristics that are driving the differentiation? Those are things that I highly recommend you have, that you capture in your report, so that management understands why you are where you are. It's because we've got all these different places we're creating new parts. We have no control over what characteristics people are selecting for these new parts. There's no data governance in place, and that's why we have so many different configurations of, say, one particular commodity group. So you want to make sure you capture all those observations in your DBA. So really, a DBA, it's a report. It just kind of summarizes what you've done, for that instance in time. Any other questions?
I'm not showing any other questions at this time.
All right. Oh, well, I would like to thank everybody for joining our classification community group, and I've got a slide up here. If you want to join the community group, you can go to our website, and you can see it's on the homepage. We've got a new website that we just launched this summer. Also, you'll find on our website we've got a classification community page, and you'll find lots of blogs like the one I'm showing here on the right. So if you have a real interest in parts data and how to enhance your parts data and the benefits of doing so, we've got over 25 blogs that you can check out and read. And also, if you want to meet with us, we go to conferences like Siemens, PLM Connection, and PTC's LiveWorks. You can meet us there. We were there this past year. We look forward to hearing from you. And if you have a topic that you'd like to submit for the next community group meeting, please send that to us, and we'll certainly give it consideration. Thanks, everybody, for joining.